You may need to define borders on top of or around a particular section on your page. Borders allow you to define left border, right border, top border, or bottom border, or a border around, instead of having to specify each of the borders. In this case, there is a border around this block. In the second case, it has just a border at the bottom of the page, border bottom. In this case, yes, there is a border around this block. However, the color of the border has been changed to something like gray. Here, there is a background color for this block, and there is a left border by this side. So, how do we define all of these borders, and how do we play around with them? First and foremost, let's define a block in our HTML page. Define a block can just specify a div, which we have seen earlier, and I'm going to give it an ID of my block. Now we have the ID to play around with. That is all we need. Or we can put in a text like, here is my block. Now we can go back to our CSS and specify that particular block. So how do we specify an ID? We start by typing an hash, then the name that has been written here, which is my block. So we have my block. Then we can define whatever we want. So let's define the border, just like we have seen on W3 School. The border of a particular div is defined this way. Border to be equal to, the first thing that you need to specify is the width or the thickness of your border. So if you want your border to be very thick, you can start with 3 pixels, then followed by a space. Then what type of border do you want? There are different types of border, just like you have here. You have the dotted, which defines a dotted border. You have a dashed, you have the solid, and a lot of other ones, which you can look at on W3 Schools. This is how they look like when used. This is the dotted border, this is the dashed border, and this is a solid border. In our case, we're going to use a solid border. So followed by the type of border. And finally, what will the color of the border be? So let's say the color of our border would be a blue color. Then because you're writing a name, you don't need the hash. So you have a blue color. So in this case, you have your border to be 3 pixels, thick, solid, and then blue. So let's reload our page and see what we have. Okay, this is what we have. We have a thick border with the blue color, and it is solid. If you need the border to be more thick, you can just have something like 10 pixels, and that is going to be very thick. So that is what we have in the border. You can also specify a particular one instead of having to define border around the block. Let's say we want a border just at the left. You can just say border left to be equal to this. So this is going to turn to just the left. We can also change this to border top, and then this is going to be at the top. You could also do this to be border bottom, and then border right. So border bottom will give us this. You could define two, something like border top and border bottom, but you don't want a border by the left and right. So that means you would have to define another line of border. So in this case, we already have a border at the top, at the bottom. Then you can define a border at the top. So you have 2 lines to define that. So in this case, you have border top, border bottom. It doesn't mean that it starts to be the same thing. For example, we want the border at the top to be red, but the border at the bottom should be blue. So you have something like this. Interesting. So we could define different borders, different images, different colors, and different things. And there is also a shorthand, which is exactly what I have explained. If you don't want to use the shorthand, you can use the way W3 School has specified this. Just like border style to be dotted. Yeah, you could also have border, color, and all of that.